My name is Victoria, and I still remember the exact moment my entire life shattered in the garage of our suburban house. I had just finished a long shift at the cafe, my feet aching, my apron still smelling like coffee and pancakes. I pulled into the driveway, hit the garage door opener, and stepped inside like any other ordinary evening. The house was quiet, too quiet. I called out for my 5-year-old daughter, but there was no answer. No little footsteps running to greet me. No giggles from the living room. I walked into the kitchen and saw it immediately. A single piece of paper on the counter, written in my mother's handwriting. I came home from work, and my daughter was gone. No warning. No call. Just a note, "We don't have space for her." And a post online. Family first. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I went to get my child. 3 days later, they were the ones calling lawyers. If you've ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to love you the most, smash that like button right now and subscribe, because this story shows exactly what happens when a mother finally decides enough is enough. The garage door had barely finished closing behind me when I grabbed my keys again and ran back to the car. My hands were steady, even though my mind was racing through every possible place they could have taken her. I drove straight to the temporary family shelter on the east side of town, the one the social worker had mentioned once during a previous conversation about emergency housing. The building looked plain from the outside, just a long brick structure with a small playground behind a chain-link fence. Inside, the front desk woman looked up when I pushed through the doors. I told her my name and that my daughter Sophia had been brought in earlier that day without my permission. She checked her computer, then asked for identification. I slid my driver's license across the counter and waited while she made a phone call. A supervisor came out a few minutes later and led me down a hallway to a small meeting room. She explained that my parents had signed the intake forms claiming they had temporary guardianship and that I was unavailable due to work. I showed her the note I had taken from the kitchen counter and explained exactly what happened when I came home from my shift. The supervisor read it twice, then left the room to make another call. When she returned, she said they would bring Sophia to me right away because the paperwork clearly showed I was the sole legal guardian. I stood there counting the seconds until the door opened, and Sophia walked in holding a staff member's hand. Her eyes were red and puffy, her hair messy from the day. She saw me and ran straight into my arms, burying her face in my shirt. She kept whispering that Grandma said there wasn't room for her anymore and that she had to stay there until things got better. I held her tight and told her that was never going to happen again. The staff helped me gather the few things they had for her while I signed the release forms. Within 20 minutes, we were back in the car heading toward Amber's apartment across town. Sophia stayed quiet most of the drive, just clutching her small backpack and staring out the window. I kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other reaching back to rest on her knee so she would know I was right there. Amber met us at the door with a spare key already in her hand. She didn't ask a lot of questions, just showed us the pull-out couch she had made up with extra blankets and let Sophia pick out a stuffed animal from her own collection to sleep with that night. I sat on the edge of the couch after Sophia finally drifted off, staring at the note I had folded and put in my pocket. The words were still there in my mother's handwriting, clear and cold. 3 days. That was all the time I was going to give them before everything changed. Later that night, while Sophia slept on the pull-out couch, I sat at Amber's small kitchen table with the note still in my hand. The words kept running through my head, and suddenly everything from the past came rushing back in sharp pieces. I remembered being 15 and standing in the living room of our old suburban house, trying to tell my parents I was pregnant. My sister Jasmine had been holding her new baby, smiling like the whole world revolved around her. My mom barely looked at me when I said the words. She just sighed and told me I had made my own mess, and now I would have to clean it up. My dad shook his head and said they weren't raising another child, that Jasmine had earned her future and I had thrown mine away. From that day on, the difference was clear. Jasmine got her college paid for, her wedding covered, and help with the down payment on her first house. Every holiday, my parents bragged about her perfect life and her beautiful daughter. When Sophia was born, my mom held her for less than a minute before handing her back and saying she looked just like me, the same tone she used when she talked about a stain on the carpet. My dad never once called himself Grandpa, They helped Jasmine with everything but told me I needed to learn responsibility. I worked double shifts at the restaurant while still finishing high school, came home exhausted, and still heard comments about how I should have made better choices. Years passed and the pattern never changed. Jasmine's life kept getting celebrated while mine was treated like a problem that needed to be managed. When Sophia started kindergarten, my parents would show up for Jasmine's daughter's events with gifts and cameras, but always had an excuse when it came to Sophia's school plays or parent nights. They said they were too busy, or that I should be handling it since I chose to keep her. Every conversation ended with the same reminder that they had already done more than enough by letting me stay in the house after I got pregnant. I thought maybe when Sophia got a little older they would soften. They didn't. Instead, the criticism grew louder. They said I was too young to be a good mother, that Sophia deserved more stability than I could give her, and that I was holding everyone back with my constant need for help. Jasmine would nod along and say things like, "We all want what's best for the kids," as if Sophia wasn't part of the kids. The message was always the same. My daughter and I were extra weight they no longer wanted to carry. Sitting there in Amber's quiet kitchen, with the note folded in front of me, I finally understood. The note wasn't a sudden decision made in anger. It was the logical ending to a story my parents had been writing since the day I told them I was pregnant at 15. They had decided long ago that Sophia and I were too much trouble, too much responsibility, too much of a burden on their perfect image of family. And now they had finally acted on it, without warning and without discussion. I folded the note one more time and slipped it into my pocket. Whatever happened in the next few days, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let them decide our worth anymore. Sophia deserved better than being treated like an inconvenience. And I was done waiting for my parents to see that. The next morning, I made the call I had been avoiding for years. Nancy Ramirez answered on the second ring. Her voice was warm but cautious when I told her who I was. She asked if we could meet that afternoon at a quiet coffee shop near their neighborhood. I agreed, dropped Sophia off with Amber for a couple of hours, and drove across town with my stomach in knots. Nancy and her husband William were already waiting at a corner table when I arrived. They stood up the moment they saw me. Nancy had kind eyes that reminded me of old photographs I once saw of Eric. William shook my hand gently and pulled out a chair for me. We ordered coffee and sat in silence for a few seconds before Nancy spoke first. She told me Eric had passed away several months earlier. Before he died, he had spoken to them about me and the possibility of a child. He regretted how he had handled everything when I was 15 and asked them to try to find me if they ever could. They had been searching quietly for weeks. When I confirmed Sophia was 5 years old and Eric was her father, Nancy's eyes filled with tears. William cleared his throat and explained that Eric's grandmother had left a trust fund specifically for any grandchildren. If DNA confirmed the connection, the trust would belong to Sophia. They didn't push. They simply said they wanted to know their granddaughter and were willing to help in whatever way I felt comfortable. No demands, no judgment about my past. Just two people who had lost their son and were now reaching out with open hands. I sat there holding my coffee cup, feeling the weight of years of doing everything alone start to shift just a little. We arranged for the DNA test the following week. The results came back faster than I expected. The lab confirmed Eric was Sophia's biological father. Nancy called me the same evening, her voice shaking with emotion. She said the trust was substantial, enough to change our lives if managed carefully. They also offered to help with housing and other support if I wanted it. I told them I needed time to think, but deep down I already knew I wasn't going to turn away the first real safety net I had ever been offered. That night, after Sophia fell asleep, I sat on Amber's couch and looked at the paperwork the lawyer had sent over. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a future where I wasn't constantly calculating every dollar and worrying about the next unexpected bill. The inheritance wouldn't make us rich, but it would mean stability, a place of our own, and the chance for Sophia to grow up without the constant shadow of my parents' disappointment. 3 days after I brought Sophia home from the shelter, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was my father's lawyer. The message was short and cold. My parents were filing a petition for custody of Sophia, claiming I was unfit and that they could provide a more stable environment. They mentioned the inheritance as part of their reasoning. I hung up without answering and stared at the wall for a long time. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The lawyer's call left me staring at the phone long after he hung up. My parents weren't just angry. They were coming after Sophia and the inheritance in the most official way possible. I spent the rest of that evening reading through the petition they had filed. Every page felt like another slap. They claimed I was unstable, that I had a history of poor decisions, and that Sophia would be better off with them in their large suburban home. They even mentioned the trust fund as proof that I might be motivated by money rather than genuine care for my daughter. The next morning, I met with my own lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Carla who specialized in family court cases. She read the documents carefully and told me the allegations were serious, but mostly built on old stories and assumptions. She warned me that court could get ugly fast, especially with grandparents who had money and connections in the community. I told her I didn't care how ugly it got. I wasn't giving up my daughter no matter what they threw at me. Courtney, my sister, texted me later that day saying she hoped I would see reason and that the whole family was worried about Sophia's future. Joshua sent a similar message, trying to sound neutral but clearly siding with our parents. I didn't reply to either of them. Instead, I focused on gathering every piece of evidence I could find. Pay stubs from the cafe showing consistent work hours, school records for Sophia, old messages where my parents had refused to help with anything from doctor visits to school supplies, and the original note they left on my kitchen counter the day they took her. The weeks leading up to the hearing blurred together into a non-stop cycle of work, preparation, and worry. I worked extra shifts whenever Amber could watch Sophia, came home exhausted, and stayed up late going over notes with Carla. Sophia asked more than once why Grandma and Grandpa were mad at us. I kept my answers simple and age-appropriate, telling her that sometimes grown-ups disagree about what's best for kids and that I was fighting hard to make sure we stayed together. She seemed to accept it for the moment, but I could see the quiet worry in her eyes every time my phone rang or when I got quiet at dinner. 3 days before the court date, my parents' lawyer sent another letter demanding mediation. Carla advised against it, saying they were likely trying to pressure me into a settlement that would give them some access to the trust or shared custody. I refused without hesitation. I had spent too many years letting them control the narrative of my life. This time, I was going to stand in front of a judge and tell the truth in my own words, with all the evidence we had collected. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. Sophia curled up next to me on the couch, her small hand holding mine even in her sleep. I looked at her peaceful face and promised myself I would not let fear win. Whatever happened in that courtroom tomorrow, I would walk out still being her mother. That was the only thing that mattered in the end. The courtroom smelled like old wood and coffee. I sat on the left side with Carla while my parents and their lawyer took the right. Jasmine and Joshua sat behind them, both avoiding my eyes. Sophia was in a small waiting room down the hall with a court-appointed advocate. The judge, a woman in her 50s with sharp glasses, called the hearing to order and asked my parents' side to present first. Their lawyer stood up and spoke smoothly about stability, family support, and how my parents could offer Sophia a better environment in their large suburban home. He brought up my age when I had her, the long hours I worked at the cafe, and suggested the inheritance might be influencing my decisions more than genuine care for my daughter. My mom took the stand next. She wiped her eyes and told the judge she had only wanted to help when I was struggling. She said they had taken Sophia to the shelter because they believed it was the responsible thing to do for everyone involved. My dad nodded along, adding that they had always tried to guide me, but I kept making the same mistakes over and over. Then it was my turn. I stood up, palms damp, and told the judge exactly what happened the day I came home from work. I described finding the note on the kitchen counter, driving straight to the shelter, and bringing Sophia home the same afternoon. I explained the years of favoritism, how my parents had supported my sister completely, but left me to figure everything out alone from the time I was 15. Carla presented the pay stubs showing consistent work, school records for Sophia, old messages where my parents had refused help with anything from doctor visits to school supplies, and the original note as evidence. The judge listened without interrupting, taking notes the entire time. The moment everyone had been waiting for came when the judge asked to speak with Sophia. The advocate brought her in. Sophia looked small in the big chair, clutching her stuffed fox tightly against her chest. The judge spoke gently, asking simple questions about where she lived, who took care of her every day, and how she felt when she stayed at the shelter. Sophia answered quietly but clearly. She said Grandma told her there wasn't space for her anymore and that she had to stay there until things got better at home. She said she was scared and cried a lot because she thought I didn't want her. When the judge asked who she wanted to live with, Sophia looked straight at me and said, "With Mommy. I want to stay with Mommy." The courtroom went completely silent. My mom's shoulders stiffened. Jasmine looked down at her hands. The judge thanked Sophia and let her go back to the waiting room. After that, everything moved quickly. The judge reviewed the evidence one last time and delivered her decision. Custody would remain with me. The grandparents' petition was denied. She stated that the allegations were not supported and that Sophia's own words carried significant weight in the case. I felt the air leave my lungs in one long breath. Carla squeezed my arm. My parents sat frozen on the other side of the room. As we gathered our things to leave, my dad tried to say something, but the judge had already stood up. The hearing was over. The judge's gavel came down and the courtroom emptied slowly. My parents stayed seated for a long moment, staring straight ahead like they couldn't believe what they had just heard. Jasmine stood up first, her face pale, and whispered something to Joshua. He only shook his head and looked away. Carla gathered our papers and told me the written order would be mailed in a few days, but the decision was final. Custody remained with me. The petition was denied. Outside in the hallway, my dad finally approached. His voice was low and tight when he said this wasn't over and that they would find another way. My mom stood beside him, eyes red but jaw set, repeating that they had only been trying to protect Sophia. I looked at both of them and said the words I had practiced in my head for weeks. We are done. No more calls, no more visits, no more pretending we are still family. You made your choice the day you took my daughter without telling me. Now I'm making mine. They didn't argue. They just stood there as I turned and walked away with Carla. Sophia was waiting in the small play area with the advocate. When she saw me, she ran over and wrapped her arms around my waist. I picked her up, even though she was getting heavy, and carried her all the way to the car. She didn't ask what happened inside the courtroom. She only asked if we could stop for ice cream on the way back to Amber's. I told her yes. The news traveled fast through our small circle. Within days, people who had known my parents for years started asking questions. The story of the note, the shelter, and the court hearing spread through the neighborhood and the church group my mom had been part of for decades. Customers at my parents' restaurant began to stay away. Some left reviews mentioning family issues and how they no longer felt comfortable eating there. Reservations dropped. Staff started looking for other jobs. 2 weeks later, my mom called Amber's number because I had blocked theirs. She sounded smaller than I had ever heard her. She said the restaurant was struggling and asked if I could talk to them about the trust money. I told her the trust belonged to Sophia, and I had nothing more to say. She tried to bring up old memories, how they had raised me, how family should stick together. I hung up without answering. Joshua sent one last text saying he was sorry things had gone this far and that he hoped we could find a way to be civil someday. I didn't reply. Courtney never reached out again. The house in the suburbs went up for sale a month after the hearing. Without the steady income from the restaurant and the help they had always counted on, my parents couldn't keep up with the mortgage and taxes. They moved into a small rental apartment on the other side of town. I heard through a distant cousin that my mom had started working part-time at a discount store, and my dad spent most days looking for buyers for the old restaurant equipment. Sophia and I moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment closer to the cafe. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. Nancy and William helped with the security deposit and sent Sophia new books every month. She started calling them Grandma Nancy and Grandpa William without being prompted. Every time she said it, something tight in my chest loosened a little more. I still drive past the old suburban house sometimes. The for sale sign is gone now and new people have moved in. I don't feel anger when I see it anymore. I feel finished. We are building something new, just the two of us, with the people who chose us without conditions. And that feels like the real ending. The months after the hearings settled into a quieter rhythm. Sophia started kindergarten at a new school closer to our apartment. She made friends quickly and came home every day with drawings and stories about her teacher. I picked up more shifts at the cafe and used the money from the trust to cover rent and groceries without worrying about the next unexpected bill. Nancy and William visited every other weekend. They never pushed or tried to take over. They simply showed up with books, took Sophia to the park, and left me space to breathe. My parents' old suburban house sold to a young couple with 2 dogs. The restaurant closed its doors for good shortly after. Without the steady flow of regular customers, and with the story of what happened spreading through the community, business dried up completely. They tried to sell the equipment and furniture but ended up taking a loss. The last I heard, they had moved into a small 1-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. Linda started working mornings at a discount store while David looked for odd jobs. Neither of them reached out again after that final call. Jasmine sent one message months later saying she hoped I was doing okay and that she missed having family gatherings. I read it twice and deleted it without replying. Joshua never contacted me again. The silence from all of them felt heavy at first, then lighter with every passing week. I realized I no longer waited for the phone to ring or checked my messages hoping for an apology that would never come. Sophia still asks about Grandma and Grandpa sometimes, but the questions come less often now. When she does, I tell her the truth in simple words. Some grown-ups make choices that hurt other people, and we decided it was healthier for us to live without that hurt. She nods like she understands more than a 6-year-old should and goes back to her coloring or her stuffed fox. We have our own routines now. Friday nights are movie nights on the couch. Saturday mornings we walk to the little bakery down the street for fresh muffins. Sophia's room is painted soft yellow and filled with her own books and drawings. No one tells her to clean it up to prove she deserves to be there. She knows she belongs. Looking back, the hardest part wasn't the court day or the months of preparation. It was accepting that the people who were supposed to love us unconditionally chose convenience over us. But that acceptance also brought freedom. I learned that protecting my daughter sometimes means walking away from the very people who raised me. It means choosing peace over pretending everything is fine. It means building a family with those who show up without conditions instead of those who only show up when it benefits them. Today, Sophia laughs louder, sleeps better, and talks about her future with bright eyes. I sleep better too. We are not rich, but we are safe. We are not perfect, but we are together. And that is enough. Sometimes I still drive past the old neighborhood. The new owners have planted flowers in the front yard. The garage door opens and closes for someone else's life now. I don't feel sadness when I see it. I feel finished. We have written our own ending. And it is one where my daughter never has to wonder if she is wanted.